All right, picking up from the last video, we were talking about asymmetric information and the two types. And in essence, we are seeing one party having more information than another. And that leads the party with more information to engage potentially in opportunistic behavior, which is the essence of the principal-agent problem. In both cases, the risk of loss increases for the principal as a result of the agent being able to conceal information relevant to the principal. When thinking about decision making at a national level, we can break down it into central planning, also known as a command type of decision making, and market, also known as a laissez-faire or free enterprise system of decision making. With central planning, you have a central planning board that determines how the resources in the country are allocated. Okay? Production is coordinated via directives from the government. Often we might call this planner sovereignty, meaning that the planners are sovereign, are superior in terms of resource allocation. Centralized coordination occurs at the highest level of the economic system. So North Korea would probably be the best example today, where the Kim Jong-un administration has complete control over most aspects of the economy and resource allocation. They determine, the planners, what is produced and where resources are directed. Okay? And when we say centralized, we mean that it is a central body that is running the economic system. The market system of decision making is where individuals, through voluntary exchange, determine resource allocation. Production is coordinated through prices, automatically generated with supply and demand. So this is a consumer sovereign environment. Consumers are superior. They direct the allocation of resources, and this is considered decentralized because there is no central body that determines allocation. It is individuals just going about their day-to-day business that create an allocation. Central planning is very easy to understand because all you have to do is ask the people in charge of the central planning board. Markets are harder to understand, and a lot of people simply don't know how markets work. But in economics, it's critical to understand the role of markets because they are nuanced, but they do accomplish a lot. If you look at the majority of items that you have that make your life better, you will find that they were likely produced voluntarily in a marketplace as opposed to provided to you through the central planning board, in our case, the government. And every economy in the world today operates with elements of both. Just like we saw when we talked about property rights, there was this mix of socialism and capitalism. There is a mix of central planning and markets in every country. In North Korea, for example, there's no doubt over here on the spectrum, but there's markets, there's people that are buying and selling things in a voluntary exchange way every day, villages and cities. But it's just that the majority of resource allocation production is determined by the government. In the US, in contrast, we're over here, right? The majority of the things that we produce and resource allocations are done, voluntarily in markets. But there is still a central planning element. The public school system, for example, you don't go to a seller of education. Most people don't go to a seller of education for K through 12. They simply sign up with the government school in their neighborhood. So that's central planning in the US. The military is central planning. When we look at mixed economies, again, the real world, we can think in terms of indicative planning and industrial policy. Indicative plans are where the planners provide information deemed insufficiently provided by the market. They're indicating to you the information that otherwise isn't there. There's not as much of this today because we have the internet and information is widely available. But this was important decades ago, before the internet, when markets could actually fail because of insufficient information. An example of this might be the way we dealt with restaurants in the past. Today, you go to the marketplace to determine what restaurant to go to. That marketplace is usually Yelp or some other rating site that allows people to go in and provide feedback about their experience at a restaurant. But prior to the internet, there was no Yelp, right? There was no kind of social forum for people to convey their views about a restaurant. And we relied on the ABC cards, the county health cards. You still go to a restaurant, you see an A, hopefully, in the window, and that gives you information. But that's government. That's the county government indicating to you that that's a safe place to eat. But very few people look at that today. I mean, if you see a B or a C, you might respond, but very few people look at the A restaurants. Instead, they go to Yelp and they decide based on the ratings. Industrial policy is where planners, through subsidies and taxation, promote industries deemed particularly important to national interests. So subsidies are where the government gives money to the public, whereas taxation is where the government takes it away. You want more of something, subsidize it. You want less of something, tax it. So you can think about the industrial policy in the US. Well, we subsidize green energy, so we get more of that. We tax alcohol, cigarettes, so we get less of that. Government is involved in the US in indicative planning to provide us information to help us make better market-based decisions, but also in industrial policy to promote certain industries and relegate others. The countries that tend to be more centrally planned, on this side of the spectrum, will often have not just indicative planning, providing information to the public, but a lot of industrial policy. Some countries, for example, have the government subsidizing gasoline, okay, or subsidizing the production of oil. And so in those instances, the government is trying to create an industry for that country, and they're using their political power to do that. Again, this would be outside of markets, right? Markets are already going to create an outcome. If you have a market for gasoline, there will be a certain price based on supply and demand that emerges. But maybe the central planning board, the government, says, we don't like that price, right? We don't like that outcome in the market. We want more people to have access to gasoline. So they might use industrial policy and maybe subsidize that gasoline. Okay, that's what Saudi Arabia has done for years, although they backed off in recent times when they used to subsidize it, meaning that the government was effectively paying a portion of the market price for the citizens. So when you went to the gas station, you saw lower prices. In the US, we do just the opposite with gas. We want less driving, so we tax it. Last time I checked, about 60 cents per gallon in California is taxed, which means that you're paying more for it, and therefore we get less gasoline being consumed. Okay? Industrial policy. Graphically, we can understand the difference between market economies and planned economy with a supply and demand model. And I'm just going to keep this simple because we don't want to get so technical we lose sight of the bigger picture. Here we have the basic supply and demand, right? Quantity on the horizontal, price on the vertical. Demand is downward sloping, meaning as price goes up, people buy less. As price goes down, people buy more. Supply is upward sloping, meaning as price goes up, suppliers make more, and as price goes down, suppliers make less. Between suppliers and demanders coming together, we have the equilibrium. And this is the point where the market pursues. So if the market is above this, the price will come down until we reach equilibrium. If the market is below this price, then the price will go up. In other words, the price will adjust in a market to ensure that we're always pursuing an equality of supply and demand. if we look at a planned economy, well, you still have the demand side the same. I mean, demand is determined by consumers, and it's downward sloping, right? Price goes down in a planned economy, people buy more. Price goes up in a planned economy, people buy less. So there's no difference really there on that side of the market. The difference lies on the supply side, because in a planned economy, the reason they're planning it is they don't like the market outcome. Someone in power doesn't like the market outcome because markets occur naturally. If you just let people go in a economy, they'll trade and create supply, demand, and prices. It will happen. It's as natural as language for people. But with a planned economy, we use the government to kind of take over, abandon the market because we don't like the market outcome, or someone doesn't like the market outcome. Maybe the price is too high, right, in the market. The voluntary exchange between suppliers and demanders is creating a price that's so high that the government doesn't like that. They want people to have a lower price. Okay? So what a planned economy really means is even though demand is the same, the supply and the price are set by government. The government decides how much is going to be produced and they determine the price. And in a planned economy, it's unlikely to be at equilibrium because equilibrium is something that is pursued through market forces. The market gravitates to this where the exact amount of supply equals that demanded. In a planned economy, prices are fixed. They're set. They don't move, which means if there is a disequilibrium, if there's more or less supply than demand at whatever price they choose, that's likely to perpetuate itself longer. For example, in this instance, the suppliers, the planners have determined they're going to produce this much supply, okay? And it's vertical because, again, it's invariant to price. And they're going to set the price here. See what's happened? They want a lower price than the market, right? So they set this price here, and they set the quantity at supply. Okay? But notice what happens. At that price, follow it across. The supply is here, but the demand is here. You have a shortage. You have people trying to get more at that low price than what's available. In a market, that price would go up. And as it went up, we would eventually reach equilibrium where supply equals demand, just like here. But in a planned economy, prices are set by government. They're not malleable unless the government changes them. Consequently, what we see in a planned economy is the government determining what's produced, supply, the government determining the price, but we simultaneously see surpluses and shortages of products. Here, we have a shortage. Now, one example of this in the US is with public housing in New York decades ago. The market was producing housing for people, but the government saw that this interplay of supply and demand led to a price that was unaffordable to a lot of people, okay? You hear this now today, right? The market is producing too high prices. So the government intervenes and they create public housing, which is essentially a fixed amount of housing, typically high rises that were built in various parts of New York City. And then they set the price lower than the market. Okay? But the consequence of this is you'll notice at the lower price, the demand exceeds the supply. The demand for housing is X double star, and the supply is X star. And under those conditions, you have people that are getting on waiting lists to get into the public housing. You have a different type of rationing system, right? In the market, what will happen is the price would go up, and people that can afford and are willing to pay the higher price, they will be the ones that get the apartments. But in a planned system, the prices don't go up, so the rationing mechanism will not be price. Even if you're willing to pay more for an apartment, you can't outbid other people because the price can't be allowed to go up because the government sets the price. So what you have to do is get in line. It's just a different rationing device. Instead of using prices to ration products, we use first come, first serve, get on a list, that kind of thing. And that was very common in countries, and still is in some countries that have government providing goods like housing. You have to get on the list. We even have here low income housing that is kind of similar, and you have to get on a list typically to get a place. Okay, so that's a good way to think about the difference between markets and planned decision making.